is the laugh of a crazy person. It's the laugh of a lunatic.
I know Donald Trump's type.
Det er 31 dager til dommedag, og ukas bidrag til å behandle nasjonens Amerikafeber er faktisk 100% made in America. Her jeg befinner meg i storbyen Pittsburgh, i den avgjørende vippestaten Pennsylvania, mens vår gjest er i Washington DC, cirka 40 mil sørøstover herfra. Mitt navn er Magnus Marsdal, jeg er redaktør for Manifest Media, og vanlig Mimer og Marsdal, det får du hver torsdag. I dag er det Amerikafeber, og vi skal diskutere et ganske grusomt amerikansk mysterium, for mens Israels regjering ifølge FN-rapporter begår forbrytelser mot menneskeheten i Gaza, vil støtten fra Joe Biden ingen ende ta. USA har bevilget militærhjelp for over 120 milliarder kroner det siste året, uanfektet av folkemord, og hvorfor det? USA er verdens mektigste supermakt. Uten økonomisk og militær støtte fra Biden er Netanyahu sjanseløs. Så hvorfor i alle dager ser det ut som Israel styrer USAs politikk mer enn omvendt? For mange virker det her ganske mystisk, men hva om du fikk vite at pro-israelske aktører bruker 1 milliard kroner på politisk reklame bare ved kongressvalget i år for å stoppe kandidater som Israel ikke liker? Det går enorme summer til å nedkjempe, henge ut og skremme både folkevalgte i politikken og menneskerettighetsaktivister på universitetene hvis de ytrer seg kritisk mot det FN etterforsker som et folkemord. Det fenomenet skal vi lære mer om i dag fra journalist Ryan Grim i Washington DC. Han var sentral i den undersøkende redaksjonen The Intercept. Han har nylig gått derfra til sitt nystartet Dropsite News, og du bør sjekke ut podcasten Breaking Points, der Ryan Grim er kommentator i den delredaksjonen som heter Counterpoints. Så det finnes Breaking Points både med og uten Ryan Grim. Han har skrevet en bok som heter The Squad, om Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and the Hope of a Political Revolution. The Squad er den radikale gruppa til det demokratiske partiet i Kongressen og har vært utsatt for aggressive angrep fra Israel-lobbyen som bruker hundretalls millioner i negativ politisk reklame bare mot den lille gjengen der på venstre fløy. Ryan Grim forteller i dag også om hvordan studentaktivister for Palestina blir hengt ut med navn og bilde og påklistret antisemitt for at de aldri skal kunne få seg noe akademisk jobb. Vi diskuterer USAs egne interesser i Midtøsten, hvordan Israel-konflikten kan påvirke presidentvalget, og hvordan presidentvalget eventuelt vil påvirke USAs støtte til Israel. Mimir Kristiansson, min makker, han er på vei til USA han også, så det blir enda mer Amerika i monitor neste uke. Jo, hvis du, kjære lytter, mener at vi trenger en digital medieplattform til venstre for midten, må du ikke gjøre dem at vi er folkefinansiert, vi er helt avhengig av lytterstøtte, så gå til manifestmedia.no og bli abonnent i dag, så får du reklamefri lytting på kjøpet. Mens her skal du få journalist Ryan Grim. Ryan Grim, welcome to our show.
Oh, thanks so much for having me.
We're going to talk about why the US government is so supportive of an Israeli regime that stands accused of a genocide. And we will start with AIPAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee. This is the most influential of the pro-Israel lobbying organizations in the US. And why did you take an interest in what AIPAC is doing to US politics?
I came to my coverage of AIPAC backwards, actually, because here in the U.S. I cover the progressive movement. I've been covering kind of the progressive wing of the Democratic Party since the mid-2000s. The rise that led, to Bernie Sanders in 2015 and 2016, and then flowing out of that came the Squad: Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, AOC, Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, Ayanna Pressley.
Yeah, so Squad is a group of Congress people who are associated with the more leftist part of the Democrats, and you were...
Yeah, they're not afraid to call themselves democratic socialists, but because we're a two-party system here, they are within the Democratic Party. If we were a European system, they would absolutely be their own kind of socialist left party. Here, they capture the imagination of millions of people, particularly young people, pining for a better world. And as soon as the Squad was elected to Congress, AIPAC has spun off a new organization that they called Democratic Majority for Israel. AIPAC had started to become a little bit toxic in Democratic circles because of the way that they challenged the Obama administration on the Iran nuclear deal. And so there was a brief moment where Democrats were keeping AIPAC at arm's length. So they created kind of a new organization that had Democratic in its name, and they started spending huge amounts of money, against Bernie Sanders in his second presidential campaign, and then going after anybody who seemed like they were remotely supportive of these four members of Congress, the squad. And then in 2022, in our congressional midterms, they spent tens of millions of dollars targeting some incumbents, but also trying to block anybody who was critical of Israel from getting to the House of Representatives to expand the size of this squad. And so a movement that really started out pushing for Medicare for all, pushing for accountability for Wall Street, higher taxes on the rich, very standard kind of democratic socialist platform, very quickly became just centrally about the Israel-Palestine conflict. Even for Rashida Tlaib, who was the only Palestinian member of the House of Representatives, she didn't run for Congress pledging to take on the issue of Israel-Palestine. She ran for Congress pledging that she was going to clean up the pollution in Detroit and give people better lives in the district of Detroit. It was a war that kind of came to them. And so since then, it has really consumed all of the oxygen on the left wing of the Democratic Party.
For our Norwegian audience, I think we should go into what it means exactly when this lobbying organization is spending tens and tens of millions of dollars to fight certain politicians who are just slightly critical of Israel. That might be enough for AIPAC to start spending money. Now, what does that mean? Is this what's going on in the primaries when you're trying to be the top of the bill and go to Congress, for instance?
Yeah, so largely this is money that's being spent in primaries. So there are a lot of different examples that you could pick from 2022, but Donna Edwards would be a good one. So this is a woman who had run for Congress, or she had been a member of Congress from the state of Maryland back in 2008, 2009. And during a previous invasion of Gaza, she had not voted for whatever the resolution in Congress was that AIPAC wanted everybody to vote for that condemned the invasion. I think she voted present on it. And ever since then, she had been on an AIPAC hit list. And so she had left Congress many, many years earlier, but then a seat opened up. And she tried to come back in 2022. They spent $7 million in the primary just against Donna Edwards.
What does the money go to? Does it go to television advertising?
Almost all of it goes to television advertising, some on social media. And what's fascinating is that in this race and in every other race, none of the money was spent talking about Israel-Palestine. It wasn't as if AIPAC ran an ad saying, in 2009, Israel invaded Gaza and Donna Edwards didn't support that invasion. Don't let her come back to Congress. That was not the ad. The ad in particular, in her case, was they said that when it came to constituent service, which is how well she responds to the needs of individuals in her district who say are having problems getting their Social Security checks or their trash isn't getting picked up on time, those kind of basic material governmental needs, they accused her of being lazy when it came to that work. And they spent millions of dollars basically calling her a lazy member of Congress. Don't let her come back. It feeds into a trope here in the United States, a racist trope that black people are lazy.
Let me understand this correctly. If I am a politician and I don't vote exactly the way AIPAC wants in Congress, they will attack me and try to stop me from being nominated or elected again, but they will attack me with anything that could hurt me. Nothing to do with Israel, nothing to do with Palestine. Just make sure that I will never go back to Congress.
Yes, and you can see it in our Federal Election Commission reports. So these organizations have to publish what they spend their money on. So the way it works, first they'll spend $50,000 to $100,000 on polling. So what they will do is they will test every message that they can think of that might harm you. And then they will get their polling results back and they will find out, it says here. So Nina Turner, for instance, She was going to be a member of the squad, the top surrogate for Bernie Sanders. She had said something critical in a graphic way of Joe Biden at one point on an interview, and they polled that, and that polled terribly with Democratic voters. They said, "Oh, she's not a loyal Democrat," and so then they spent millions of dollars on billboards, on television commercials, social media ads, just blasting that particular message. So, and they do it through the super PAC called United Democracy Project. And the United Democracy, what they mean by United Democracy is they love to refer to Israel as the only democracy in the Middle East. The United States is a democracy. There's two united democracies. But for a casual viewer on television, it says this ad was paid for by United Democracy Project. You have no idea that this is AIPAC, that this is pro-Israel money. All you know is that you just heard these bad things about this person.
And I understand that they were successful against Turner, against Edwards. How many politicians have they stopped with this AIPAC hit list?
It's an interesting question because you can certainly give them credit for at least half a dozen or more where it was still a close race and they spent millions of dollars. Then there are maybe a dozen more on top of that, where it wound up not even being that close after AIPAC spent enormous amounts of money, and then the progressive candidate could never get off the ground. And then there's a more subtle way and a more insidious way that it works, and I wrote about this in my book too, where consultants for progressive candidates will get on a call at the very beginning of the race, and before AIPAC has spent a dime in the race, the question that the consultants are answering are, how do we keep AIPAC out of this race? And the answer usually is, well, let's tweet, I support Israel. And let's put out a statement about how robustly we support Israel. In some cases, John Fetterman is a good example, Maxwell Frost down in Florida, they would reach out directly to either DMFI or AIPAC and say, look, we don't want to get nuked by you over this issue. This is not our top issue.
So when AIPAC takes down a politician, that sets an example to other politicians, and those politicians are not Palestinians. They have local communities and constituencies that they serve in their country, for which the Middle East is not their prime interest. Whereas for AIPAC, it's all about Israel. So they can use their power, their money on this one issue and scare most U.S. politicians away from talking about conditions on aid to Israel, talking about the obvious problem, which is the genocide going on in Gaza. Is that how it works, like a chilling effect?
That's exactly how it works. It becomes a very rational, pragmatic question for a candidate who says, I got into this to raise wages, to fight for unions, to bring health care to people. I would like to see justice in Palestine, but if calling for justice in Palestine means that I lose my seat and then I don't get to do the other good things that I'm here to do, and I'm replaced by somebody who is not for expanding healthcare, fighting for labor unions, then I've made the world a worse place. You can very easily rationalize your way to the argument. And in fact, in almost every case, they are correct that if they take that stand, they will actually lose their seat. There is no significant, pro-Palestinian super PAC or pro-Palestinian money on the other side. So on some issues, let's say climate, there are a lot of active climate organizations where if you are a strong candidate who's going to fight climate change, you will get money from these grassroots groups and from some bigger rich people. If you don't care about climate change, the oil industry will support you. So you're covered on either side. Israel-Palestine, there's only one direction. There's money on one side and none on the other. And like you said, in most districts, there aren't even voters that care about this. Rashida Tlaib's district, there are in a handful of others. But in general, the Democrats are pro-civil rights and pro-justice, but it's not top of mind, and they're not Arab or Palestinian.
So when we look at the United States policy on Israel from the outside, it seems outrageous, and people are really scratching their heads as to why does this country support Israel even now with tens of billions of dollars worth of military aid, while the state of Israel is accused of genocides and crimes against humanity, and we all see what's going on down there. Do you think that this process you have just described about how AIPAC will target politicians who make up Congress and the Senate helps explain this mystery?
It explains a huge portion of it. I think weapon sales and the political economy around that explains a decent amount of it as well. But yes, the two of the most outspoken critics and squad members of the genocide in Gaza were Cori Bush from St. Louis and Jamal Bowman from New York. AIPAC spent, I think, $17 million to take out Jamal Bowman, and maybe close to $10+ million going after Cori Bush, and defeated both of them. So while you had a handful of critics at the outset after the October 7th attacks and the resulting pummeling of Gaza, you had a handful calling for a ceasefire. Without the money that AIPAC had spent over the last couple of cycles, you may have had, let's say, 60 Democrats who were willing to be outspoken and say that this is appalling. And at that point, then you get a threshold number who are going on cable news, who are giving others cover. One of the cleverest things that AIPAC did actually in 2022 is go after Andy Levin, who is he is a scion of this dynasty in Michigan of the Levin family. Both Carl Levin and Sander Levin had been highly regarded politicians there. He was a synagogue president, and he called himself a liberal Zionist. But he was also fiercely critical of Israel's behavior a lot of the times. And the thing that caught AIPAC's attention, he would defend Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar when they were getting accused of anti-Semitism for their criticism of Israel. He would say, I'm a synagogue president. I can tell you that these women are not anti-Semitic. They have legitimate criticisms of Israel. That was extremely powerful. And so they spent millions of dollars to take out Andy Levin. And so he's no longer in Congress, and he was not in Congress, during this most recent war.
Well, I read that AIPAC is spending around $100 million just in this congressional race, just to keep politicians they don't like out of Congress. In my mind, stuff like that should never be legal in a democracy. But
it's crazy.
Let's not get into my mind.
And it didn't used to be legal. Yeah, it was a Supreme Court.
So the Supreme Court made sure that money has its way with the American people, or at least their politicians. But if it is true that the lobbying effort and the struggle over politicians' minds and careers play a huge role in Israel's strategic position in the world, because the support from the United States of America is absolutely fundamental and necessary for Israel's strategic position, then the struggle over American minds will be very important also, not just the politicians, but also what's going on in the campuses in the universities. The movement to divest or boycott Israel, to build public opinion against genocide, etc., which we have also seen on campuses. And there you have another outfit called the Israel on Campus Coalition. That was more of an activist thing, I understand. It was reported in Israel that the Israeli government launched this wide-ranging campaign to put pressure and to shame students or faculty, people who are speaking out against what they see as genocide, and they're going to go into the universities and try and disrupt activism. Have you been following this thing?
Yeah, yes. So the Ministry of Strategic Affairs, which is a bureau, within Israel, spends an enormous amount of money in coordination with pro-Israel groups in the United States, and through kind of pro-Israel chapters that are organized on college campuses to spread the message, to spread a pro-Israel message on campus, and also to counteract any protests that start arising. And the card they play is, these are anti-Semites. You don't take seriously their criticisms. Their criticisms are themselves anti-Semitic. The slogans they use, from the river to the sea, or whatever else, that those are steeped in anti-Semitism, and they should be condemned, and they should be banned and not allowed to organize on campus. And that if the university deans or presidents, don't sufficiently condemn them, that they too should be fired, and that commissions need to be built to investigate all of this. So it's a constant kind of campaign to make sure that that criticism does not rise to the level that gets taken seriously.
And I talked to a Palestinian-American sociology professor the other day here in Pittsburgh, and he told me that when they had a meeting on campus with students and faculty discussing questions of boycott Israel, etc., some person would come in to the room at the end of the meeting and just photograph everyone who was there. And also that on campuses, different universities, you would have posters or billboards with just ordinary students and their name saying anti-Semite, and also that the object here is to make sure they don't get a job, they don't get a scholarship, that they want to hurt your reputation, but also your livelihood and your career, just for organizing or in a free speech manner your views on the genocide.
Yeah, that's a campus version of what they do in Congress. And so while they might keep, a handful of the most active people from getting jobs, or even get them suspended, every other student sees what's happening to them. And then when they're faced with the question, do I go play basketball this afternoon, or do I go study, or do I go to this protest? They think, well, I support the cause, but what's one more person showing up at the protest when I might get photographed, and who knows what consequences this might have for me down the road.
And it's also, I think it's quite clear that what's going on here, if the Israeli ministry is behind it, is this, that a foreign power is recruiting agents on American soil. They are recruiting pro-Israeli students and others to go out on campuses and put pressure on the American democracy. And this shouldn't be legal, because this is a foreign power operating for its own interest. And usually people like that are arrested. But are they allowed to just go on? Does not the American government protect its own democracy?
Yeah, there's an Israeli exception, a de facto exception to the law. In the U.S., it is almost offensive to even say that Israel is a foreign country. It is an objective fact. Like, Israel is a foreign country. It is another country. It is not the United States. But to say that it is a foreign country will raise eyebrows. People will say, well, what are you trying to say there? Are you trying to say that we're not allies and partners with Israel, that we're not close friends, that we don't have a special relationship? That are you playing into some type of trope about dual loyalty here? Mm-hmm. And everything then flows from that. So if you understand that on a fundamental level, Israel is not felt as a foreign country, then everything else makes sense. Like, if it is felt as effectively an extension of the United States, or sometimes it feels like the United States might be an extension of Israel, then our response to those foreign activities makes much more sense. Then it's just normal, all friends here, just sorting out our differences.
Now, there's discussion on the left in Europe about the reason for American support and almost unconditional support for even this extremist government that Netanyahu is at the helm of today. And on the one hand, you would have the sort of explanation we have been talking about, which is the Israeli efforts to have an impact on US politics. And it's very obvious that Israel has a strong interest in retaining the uniquely extensive and unconditional support it enjoys from the Biden government. But on the other hand, you have the idea that the United States have interests of its own involved here in a strong Israel in the Middle East. So what's your opinion here? What's in it for the American superpower?
It's a good question, because for 15 years, the U.S. has been saying that it is time to disengage from the Middle East, step away, and no longer get bogged down in Middle East conflicts the way that we have for 50 years. And we need to quote the phrase here in Washington is pivot to Asia. Like the U.S. foreign policymakers are not kidding when they say that a confrontation with China is the thing that really animates their vision of foreign policy over the next decades. That really is what they want to be doing. And that involves, diplomacy and saber rattling involving everyone, Australia, Philippines, Indonesia, Vietnam, Thailand, Korea, and on. Not even to speak of the rising power of India. So that's where the U.S. really feels like it ought to be focusing its attention, and yet it's not. And yet it remains bogged down. And so it is a real open question about why it is not, the United States has such difficulty carrying out what it genuinely believes are in its own interests.
But if we look at the region itself, the so-called Middle East, it has a lot of oil-producing states and areas. Israel is probably more like olive oil, and it appears to me that the U.S. Is not very popular in this region because of its support for the apartheid state of Israel. So, on the balance, does the support for Israel strengthen the U.S. strategic position in this region, the Middle East, which is an important region, or is it the opposite?
Recently, you saw China broker a détente both between some Palestinian factions and also broker a détente between Iran and Saudi Arabia.
Détente, what does that mean?
Oh, that's I guess it's originally a French term. It means like an agreement, like we'll put aside our differences. China's moving in and bringing people together in their shared interests, while the U.S. is seen as a chaos agent along with Israel there. And so the U.S. still has overwhelming military power, and the dollar still remains extremely powerful, and its sanctions regime remains powerful. It does feel like it's waning, and it does feel like the U.S. is hastening its own imperial decline, but seems not to be able to get out of its own way.
Last couple of questions here. How is the war in Gaza and the current escalation in the region affecting the fight for the White House, do you think?
The escalation, so the number one impact that this war is going to have over the next month will be on gas prices. Because like we said earlier, this is an issue that, that a lot of young people are passionate about. There are millions of Muslim and Arab voters that are passionate about it. But among the overwhelming electorate, it's not the first issue that they care about. But you're already seeing with the saber rattling between Iran and Israel, and also the attacks and the counterattacks, gas prices start to spike. And if Israel does, as expected, launch a counterattack on Iran, and then Iran, as promised, launches another counterattack back at Israel, now you could see gas prices absolutely surging here in the United States, and then the American people start to care. Then it matters. And then Kamala Harris, I think, gets beaten fairly easily. And I think Trump and Bibi both know that if they can drive gas prices up high enough, it'll be very difficult for Harris to win.
Are there potential Harris voters that will not vote for her because of what they see as support for genocide?
Certainly, Michigan is the place. So much of it is happenstance. Like, do the voters live in the right areas? Like Pakistani voters, for instance, live in states that are not close. They're concentrated in Texas, Washington, New Jersey, and those are not swing states. So what they think about, say, Imran Khan doesn't matter in American politics. But because so many Palestinians and Lebanese Americans are in Michigan, then what they think does matter. And polls now have Kamala Harris and Trump tied with Muslim voters, which is an extraordinary development. Donald Trump implemented a Muslim ban, Muslim ban as president, and he's still tied with Kamala Harris. A lot of those voters are also going to either sit it out or vote for a third-party candidate.
Because they just will not touch a candidate that has not opposed what they see as genocide.
A lot of them say that, look, genocide is a red line.
Yeah.
And I don't care about anything else.
Okay, the last question. Will the outcome of the presidential election have any effect on U.S. policy towards Israel, do you think?
It's a really interesting question, and that's another thing that a lot of voters are saying when it comes to whether or not they're going to bother to vote for the lesser evil, because they're like, look, do we even know whether or not the Democrats are the lesser evil here? What if they're the greater evil? Trump is such a wild card that you could imagine Trump giving Netanyahu a green light for an utterly, completely gloves-off devastation of the entire region. Or you could imagine Trump picking up the phone and saying, this needs to be done in a week. This is causing me problems. So it really is an open question. And it's not obvious at all, I think.
Yeah, Trump, he could call and say, Bibi, thanks for spiking the gas prices so that I won the election. But now I'd really like to see those gas prices go down again. Could you fix that?
Yeah. He totally could. Or he might not. Like, he's just completely unpredictable.
Well, at least he's brought that back into politics.
Now, he probably believes the claims that Iran is trying to assassinate him. So that might play into Trump's willingness to let Netanyahu go crazy.
We must annihilate Iran to stave off that shit. Ryan Grimm, thank you so much for being with us here in Manifest Media.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I know Donald Trump's type.